Hey guys, the Portrait here. So I feel like I've been in like the 90 days into the quarantine, self-quarantine, and what doesn't help is that my office has a blind that blocks out all sunlight, so my sense of time is all off. I just woke up at around like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm just so out of it, but I'm gonna watch my last drawing and provide some commentary that hopefully will help you guys understand my thought process and procedures a little bit more. So as you can see, now this one was kind of it meant to be a practice, but it turned out okay, so I posted it on YouTube. This drawing took me less than 1 hour, and that's me watching like a movie, kind of, without 100% of attention on the drawing. This just to show you that drawing can be something that you can get very proficient at, to the point where you don't have to think about it that much. So if you find drawing very tiring right now, that's because you're not used to it yet. So at first I mapped out everything with my dirty blending stump. The benefit of that is that the tone values are very low. They are very easily manipulated, so I can erase, change them, change their positions without any issues. So basically, I'm not committing anything to the drawing. Once I feel like, and also it gives the benefit that you can kind of see what's going on, so you can use your right brain alone without having to measure angles or anything, feel like whether the drawing is going the right direction or not. So right now I did the half the face. I mapped out the nose and the mouth. Just in case you guys wondering where I'm placing everything, this is a very standard rule, a very common rule that I have talked about many times in the past, which is the rules of the third, which is forehead to the eyebrow, that's 1/3, and then eyebrow to the bottom of the nose, that's the other third, which is roughly the same distance as the first one, and the last one is bottom of the nose to the bottom of the chin. So those three are roughly the same distance. And of course, that's just a standard that you start with, and based on different people you draw, you tweak them slightly based on your observation and so on. So at this point, I think that the eyes are okay and the nose placement are okay, and I'm starting to apply a little bit more pressure and commitment to the drawing. That's why the charcoal pencil comes out. Because at this point, let's say if something else is a little bit off, I can move them closer or further away from that eye. So that first eye that I drew become like a reference point. And at this point, I start to add a little bit more detail to it, because on social media, I think people really like to see like something like, especially an eye, a realistic eye that comes out first. But also it has the benefit, like I said before, of using that as a reference point. And here, I'm able to just look at it and I'm saying, okay, could this be, like a decent drawing? Does it look right? And it feels like it's okay. Hair, I'm not worried about too much. My goal here is to create a little bit more stylized portrait. The hair, I want to keep it very loose, very almost abstract, and just very casual, as a contrast to a more detailed and refined face, which I'll talk a little bit more later on. So at this point now, I'm adding the eye to the other side. Notice that I added first not with the pencil, because you cannot erase that as easily. I'm using blending stump, which again give me wiggle room to remove it, change it, erase it if I needed to. And left side, I'm starting adding more and more detail to the eyes. Now I'm adding the eyebrow, and I want to put the hair there just to give me an idea of how thick the hair I would like to be, so that when I look at the drawing, it helps me just to look at the drawing immediately and sense whether it is going the right direction. And also during this drawing, I took breaks like here and there, for just very short breaks of 5 minutes, not because I'm tired, but because I need a constant, like a fresh point of view. 5 minutes of not looking at the drawing and then look at the drawing again, you will be able to see maybe errors or something that looks weird that you would not otherwise be able to see if you just keep looking at the drawing and draw for like 2 hours straight. Sometimes I'm lucky and I do that and nothing goes too wrong, but sometimes you don't. And now as I'm becoming more and more confident, as more details are added, it becomes easier and easier and more obvious to just rely on the intuitive side of our perception to judge whether something is going the right way. I know I repeat this part a lot, but to get it to this stage is very important. So back at this drawing, the positions are roughly correct. Individual shapes of the eye, I know I can tweak that, no problem. I become more and more like bold. Confident. I prefer the word confident, but you gotta be bold sometimes. I'm able to add to the other side of the face and shading other side of the eye, adding a little bit of darker lines. Become more and more committed because charcoal pencil, when you erase it, it leaves a little bit of mark. No matter how soft it is, it still leaves something behind. So now I can barely see the nostrils of my nose, but I know roughly they're in the right correct position. At one point I was very concerned about this drawing because the two eyes for some reason the angle looks wrong and it looks very droopy. It looks a little bit droopy. That's why on the left side you can see how heavy of eyeliner and mascara I added to the eye to offset that what at the time that I perceived of that droopiness, which probably was just in my head at the time. And now I'm working on when the right eye started to come out, which I'm already committed because all the dark tones are put down with charcoal pencil. I'm thinking, okay, this drawing looks good, but the right eye from our point of view is slightly lower than the left eye, but that's not a big deal. I'll just make the top part a little bit heavier, and I haven't added the mascara and eyeliners and all that yet. So I feel like this is still going in the right direction. So I'm gonna start tweaking the tones on the background. And when you tweak tones on the background regarding your portrait, if you are drawing a female, especially a young female or a child, it's very important that if you were to make any mistakes, it's much better to make the mistakes where the tone is very smooth and the value is lighter than it's supposed to be, than darker than what it was supposed to be. Ideally, you don't make any mistakes, but if you were to make a mistake, I would rather you to make the mistake that's leaning towards lighter and smoother for girl and child portraits. For guys, it doesn't matter. You can get away with a lot more. And here is where I'm just where everything's kind of mapped out and it looks okay to me. That's when it's actually much more relaxing, and I can just start to put down heavier and heavier tone values. And I'm much more confident now that nothing's going to go too wrong. So the detail part is I realize the detail part is it's the most enticing and attractive part about the drawing, but it is not the most difficult part of the drawing. The most difficult part of the drawing happened within the first 3 minutes of this video, when I was first mapping out all the features. And I think anybody here who has experience with portrait art, drawing portraits especially, knows that to be true probably. Details I could spend 10 hours doing details and drawing every single eyelash, every single pore, like if I wanted to, right? But that's just time. You just require time. That's not difficult. It is time consuming. Relatively speaking, there is absolutely nothing wrong with it. And one of these days, I might do one that's very, very detailed. But it's just, relatively speaking, it is not the most difficult part of a drawing. So here I'm kind of creating a style of a hair that I think that would go well with it. I kind of want to make the hair a little bit messy, not like somebody who's like just had their hair down. Honestly, I just went with the flow. I wasn't thinking too much about it. And the lips is another, if you have a choice between drawing lips that is closed versus one that is open and showing teeth, I always will pick one that is closed. It's just much. There's a few reasons for that I'll talk about later. But for this one, I think it's okay for it to draw with the lips slightly open because it's a very natural expression. And the light is obviously, you always want to keep track of, at least think about how the light works. So in this drawing, the light is coming from the front and slightly leaning towards the left, our left side. And so any part that is really, really, how should I say, deep and dark, you want to make it as dark as you can. Especially, this is why I love charcoal, because charcoal generally speaking, give you a much wider value of tone range. You can go from the whitest white to the darkest dark. And since we're drawing a portrait, what happens when drawing a realistic portrait on a 2D paper? You're essentially creating an optical illusion, right? You're trying to creating this 3D-dimensional looking thing on a 2D paper. And intuitively, we have complete control over any object's position in terms of X or Y in the right location. But how do you show the viewer the depth of something? How far something is close to you versus something that is receding, right? And without other objects and perspective context, how would you do that? And the only thing we can rely on in this case is tone value. How high, like her nose is obviously closer to us than her chin, and especially the area that is between her face, her cheek, and her hair. That you have to do it with different levels of shade. So shading help you creating that Z-axis illusion. And this concept, a lot of beginners, they just afraid to do is that they're afraid to put really heavy tones down. When there are times where you need to put heavy tones down, don't be afraid to put just like extremely heavy values down, because that creates interest in contrast and it creates interest in depth and correct amount of depth. Like I want her face to come out towards us and to be the focal point of this drawing. And I want the hair to be very abstract and kind of even messy and abstract, something that different viewers may interpret it in different ways. Some people might see it as just a particular style. Some may see it as a different color. Some may see it as a different structure, maybe, depends. See, now I'm adding a very heavy patch of a tone to the right bottom, oh my god, right bottom of her face. This gives you an idea that this part here is of great depth. So in this style of realism, it's always better to, regardless of what reference you may or may not be using, to think of in terms of 3D instead of something just 2D that you're transferring over. Otherwise, you're gonna hit a pretty low ceiling real fast. And you can see at this point I'm just doing hair and I'm just so random and messy and relaxed about it. Add some highlight here and there, and that's done with eraser. A lot of people always have asked me that, how do you do the highlights in the hair? I do with the eraser most of the times. And one of the things that I do want to emphasize is that we love contrast. So if you look at her face, there's a huge difference of contrast between her skin and then the dark part of her eye. And yet we don't find that looking bad in any way. Because if you do the contrast right, it creates interest. And there are all different types of contrast. So for example, in this drawing, there's a contrast of refined, more realistic face versus a very loose, not that realistic and very rough hair. And this type of contrast creates an interesting style, and of course it's subjective. Not everybody likes it. Now imagine if for this style, I made everything of very equal detail and realism, which works for a lot of other, styles of art. But for this kind of like loose charcoal drawings, it is not always a good thing to be uniformly detailed, assuming there's no other context such as social commentary and such. Because if the drawing itself is super realistic and super detailed, that it is to the point of indistinguishable from a photograph, then the viewer might at first admire the artist's skill and their effort. But that's where the viewer's participation generally ends. They have to take in whatever the artist drew. Any discussion or participation or thoughts the viewer would have about the artwork is then have to be about what the art is about instead of the artwork itself, which is not a bad thing. It's just a natural consequence of that kind of style to be aware of. I mean, you take paintings like Monet, who is able to capture a feeling, a sense of a mood, and even enhance that through his painting, and it's really just a bunch of colored dots with no detail. The viewer would have to do a lot of participation, subconsciously or not, to see it as the artist sees the scenery and feel something that is similar to what the artist felt. Can this be achieved through realism like a photograph? I feel like no, but of course, photograph can offer a completely different set of information, so it is all very subjective. As an artist, you get to decide what your goal is. But anyway, I feel like we're getting a little too far from this drawing. I hope you guys were able to learn something about my approach and take the part that works for you. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments and I will do my best to answer them. I will release a longer version and a more detailed commentary regarding my specific technique on Patreon. And if you haven't seen my last video where you can submit your own artwork and I will do some tweaks and hopefully that would help you in terms of your development as an artist, please check that out. And I hope this has been helpful and I'll talk to you guys next time. Cheers!